Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Last year, the Leiden Department of Art History organized the museum talks on campus. Due to COVID-19, we cannot invite you to our campus this year, unfortunately, because we really looked forward to meeting all of you again. We decided to go online as we are convinced that talking about art can bring some relief in these troublesome times. Moreover, thanks to going online, we can reach a far more international audience. So I'm pleased to welcome everyone today, our Leiden students and alumni, my Dutch colleagues, everyone else from Leiden and the Netherlands, and this year also everyone from all over Europe and even the world. And registrations showed us that we have American colleagues among us today. So happy Thanksgiving. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to thank Femke Stokkel, Antine Hartman and Sandrine de Jong for their support and enthusiasm. Our speaker today is Sandra Barrelbach, Curator of Old Master Paintings at the Dordrechts Museum. He will talk about an exhibition that will be put on show in fall 2021, that is within a small year. The central figure will be Aelbert Cuyp, and the focus will be on his influence on the English painters Gainsborough, Constable and Turner. Sandra Barrelbach has curated many exhibitions, among other painters on Godefridus Schalke and Aart Schouwman. But he curated recently also a most fascinating show on the versatility of fish and its significance in Dutch and Flemish visual culture, together with Henk Slechte. Sandra, thank you very much for being here. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the new exhibition. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stijn.
I'll open your... There you go. There's the PowerPoint.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. And I'd love to talk about the upcoming exhibition and about the ideas, the choices that we have made, the concept of the exhibition. Well, as you know, the Dordrechts Museum focuses mainly on Dordrecht painting, especially for the old master paintings. And we are lucky to show several paintings by Aelbert Cuyp in our collection. This painting is a late, perhaps the highlight of our collection, a late painting by Aelbert Cuyp with the resting horseman in a landscape. And it shows the very typical golden light, the golden glow entering the painting from the left side. It is this typical contre-jour effect. He places the sun outside of the picture frame and actually also behind the painting, and this causes the effect of it casts long shadows in the foreground, and there's always a sense of calm, a sense of stillness in the paintings by Aelbert Cuyp. You can see how these figures are resting and actually enjoying this warm summer evening. So this is very typical for Cuyp. And we can show in the museum actually the development from early paintings by Cuyp to later works. And also we have this charming little portrait of a duck called Seitgen, 20 years old. A lovely painting that shows that he was also an animal lover. And of course, he's also the painter of cows, of cattle. We have in our museum a separate room devoted to Cuyp, and this is actually the painting that you can see here in the center. Let me see. This work here was only presented yesterday. It is a painting from the collection of the Earl of Harrowby. It is a long-term loan from England. It was restored in the Dordrechts Museum this year, actually during the lockdown by Lidwien Speleers, our conservator. And we are happy that yesterday we could actually unveil this restored painting. Frits Dupart, the former director of the Mauritshuis, was there to unveil this painting and to show it to the press. And we can now show this painting, which is sort of an appetizer for the exhibition. Actually, at this time, the exhibition would have taken place if it were not for the coronavirus situation, of course. But now we can already show this painting in our Cuyp room. And in our Cuyp room, there's also a I think in the earlier this year, we could add this lovely small painting by Jacob Cuyp, the father of Aelbert Cuyp, to our collection. We bought it earlier this year, and it is in our Cuyp room now. And it is a portrait of a baby, an 8-month-old baby, a baby boy, the smallest painting that he ever made on panel within its original frame. And the interesting thing is, of course, that in Dordrecht we can show not only Aelbert Cuyp, but also the work of his father and teacher, Jacob Cuyp, and even his uncle, Benjamin Cuyp. And of course, the city itself is also a context for Cuyp. Cuyp can be, well, you could say he's the ultimate local painter. He was born in Dordrecht. He worked and lived his entire life in the city. His teacher was his father, and also his clients almost exclusively came from Dordrecht. And let me see, in 1992 and 1993, we organized an exhibition called The Visible World, the title taken, of course, from the famous art treatise by Samuel van Hoogstraat, who was also from Dordrecht. And this was actually the first large project, the large exhibition and research about the painting from Dordrecht. And for the first time, these painters were all presented and researched in an exhibition and a catalogue. And one of the outcomes was that, of course, the Cuyp family played an important role in Dordrecht painting, apart from other aspects like the many pupils from Rembrandt that came from Dordrecht, like Ferdinand Bol, Nicolaas Maas, Samuel van Hoogstraat, and Arend de Gelder. Many important Rembrandt pupils actually came from Dordrecht. But the Cuyp focus in the collection and in the artistic climate in Dordrecht is of special significance, of course. And after this exhibition, we were thinking of making monographic exhibitions about most of these important painters. But in the end, only an Arend de Gelder exhibition took place. And it was actually later on in 2006 that we decided already that, because 2006 is a photo of the Rembrandt House Museum, of course, it was the Rembrandt year to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the birth of Rembrandt. And the Rembrandt House even organized 4 exhibitions about Rembrandt, and several other museums, of course, also did that in that year. And at that time, we already thought about, well, 2020 should be the Cuyp year, 400 years anniversary of the birth of Aelbert Cuyp. So that was when the idea already originated to organize a large exhibition about Aelbert Cuyp. But that was only a few years after the large Aelbert Cuyp exhibition that took place in Washington, London, and Amsterdam. This is the catalogue. This was the initiative of Arthur Wheelock, the curator of the National Gallery in Washington. And this was a large retrospective monographic exhibition about Aelbert Cuyp, showing some 45 paintings by Aelbert Cuyp and also many drawings. And during the Amsterdam venue, which took place in 2002, the Dordrechts Museum decided to organize, to host an exhibition to coincide with this Amsterdam venue. So Aelbert Cuyp was in Amsterdam, and we decided to have an exhibition about Jacob Cuyp, his father and teacher, in the Dordrechts Museum. Here we can see the painting by Jacob Cuyp of Michiel Pompe van Slingeland as a 6-year-old boy, a very lively portrait. Jacob Cuyp was a portrait specialist and is mostly known for his lovely children portraits. And this is an interesting case because the background of this painting is actually based on a drawing in the British Museum by Aelbert Cuyp. And Aelbert Cuyp, of course, for a long time was an assistant in the workshop of his father. In the exhibition, we showed several interesting examples of paintings that were a collaboration between Aelbert and Jacob Cuyp. In this case, this is the painting that we could get on loan from the museum in Buenos Aires, the Museum of Decorative Arts. And the figures, the couple is painted by Jacob Cuyp, and the landscape, in fact, by Aelbert Cuyp. So this was very interesting to show Aelbert Cuyp and to devote an exhibition and a catalogue to Jacob Cuyp. Lots of new results came from this. But during the exhibition, we were thinking also about new ideas for Cuyp exhibitions. And I think it was Wouter Kloek, former curator of the Rijksmuseum, who told me about that, well, it could also be a very interesting idea to devote an exhibition to, well, sort of spheres of influences around Aelbert Cuyp. This is another highlight from the collection of the Dordrechts Museum, The View of Dordrecht by Jan van Gooyen from 1651. And Jan van Gooyen, of course, was also an important influential painter, and Aelbert Cuyp in his 20s was very much influenced by Jan van Gooyen, and we have in our collection an early painting from 1640, 1641, which clearly shows the monochrome tonal landscape type that Jan van Gooyen made popular. So the early work by Aelbert Cuyp is very much inspired by Jan van Gooyen, and also by other painters, like, for example, Simon de Vlieger. This is a painting from the Hamburger Kunsthalle, and it shows a harbor scene. This is actually the Riedijkspoort, one of the main gates in Dordrecht. And this is also, especially when you look at the sky, the way how de Vlieger paints the sky, and also it is a bit monochrome. And if you look at landscapes by Aelbert Cuyp, like this painting, which is now in Washington, it also shows a pier, and actually in the background this same Riedijkspoort, and the effect of light in the clouds is more or less the same. So Simon de Vlieger is also an important source of inspiration for Aelbert Cuyp. And it's interesting to see how there were artistic relations with Rotterdam, between Dordrecht and Rotterdam, but also The Hague, and mainly Utrecht also, and even Middelburg, for example. So this was an idea for an exhibition, and well, here this is a painting by Jan Bot from the collection of the Queen of England, and well, Aelbert Cuyp never went to Italy, but when Jan Bot, one of the Italianate painters, returned from Italy in 1642, Aelbert Cuyp must have seen his landscapes and was very much inspired by this southern light, but also by the way Jan Bot painted the trees and the foliage in the foreground. And even the subject, the baptism of the eunuch, that is seen in this painting, is a subject that Aelbert Cuyp painted several times, like this painting in Anglesey Abbey, National Trust. This is one of the paintings that will be in the exhibition next year. And it shows the same subject, and of course also the golden light, which is very much inspired by the work of Jan Bot. So this was an idea about showing these different influences around Aelbert Cuyp. But well, later on we abandoned more or less this idea, and thought that it might be a too art historical approach for an exhibition, especially for a broad audience. So eventually, well, we thought about what different types of exhibitions we have already made. Well, for example, this is an exhibition in 1977, an exhibition in a time that, well, it lasted only 2 months. And this was about the Cuyp family. This was actually the first Aelbert Cuyp exhibition that we made in Dordrecht. This was the, excuse me, let me see, yeah. We have a little bit trouble with, I can't see the next slides here. Oh, there it goes. excuse me. There we go. Yeah, sorry. The exhibition about Aelbert Cuyp, the family of Aelbert Cuyp, this showed not only Aelbert Cuyp, but of course also his father and even his uncle Benjamin Cuyp. It was the first exhibition about Aelbert Cuyp in Dordrecht. And the interesting thing was that the response in the press very much focused on, well, actually the appreciation of Aelbert Cuyp. This is an article from a 1977 newspaper. This was actually written by the late Ben Brose, and it is about the discovery of Aelbert Cuyp in England. It tells about the total clearance sale of the work of Aelbert Cuyp, and not only with this exhibition that took place in Dordrecht, but also with the large Aelbert Cuyp overview that took place in Washington, London, and Amsterdam. Journalists and critics who wrote about the exhibition focused on this aspect of the collecting of Cuyp, the appreciation of Cuyp, and what this is of course a very interesting aspect. Aelbert Cuyp was discovered relatively late if you compare it with other Dutch 17th century painters that were of course collected in England and abroad. But once his collectability was established, let's say in the middle of the 18th century, the flight of his paintings was, well, total and immediate. By the end of the 18th century, there were no more important paintings by Cuyp left in Dordrecht and in Holland. So it took place in a very short period of time, and even today, the most important paintings by Aelbert Cuyp are still in England. So we thought, well, this is a very interesting aspect, and of course, the large painting in the Rijksmuseum was only acquired by the Rijksmuseum in 1965, and this was also, by the way, the moment when de Bruijnkops wrote an article about the discovery of Cuyp, focusing on the collecting of Cuyp indeed in England. And later on, the Dordrechts Museum also acquired a late landscape by Aelbert Cuyp, still the most important paintings by Cuyp are in England. If we look at one of the most famous paintings by Aelbert Cuyp, is this late landscape, the so-called Bude Cuyp, that was acquired by the National Gallery, I think in 1988, for an enormous sum. And this is a landscape which, according to many, was almost like the start of the so-called Cuyp craze in England. It was also made into a print by Elliot, in reverse it is, and this was published by Boydell, and he wrote about Aelbert Cuyp, and this is the moment when, I think this is 1769, when Cuyp was also called for the first time the Dutch Claude in England, referring of course to Claude Lorrain, and to the golden light in his landscapes. So Cuyp became the painter of light and the golden light and landscapes in England, a favorite of the English. Let me see. In the meantime, in the Dordrechts Museum, there was also sort of a you could say a trend. We organized several exhibitions in which our own collection was placed in a broader context of paintings from foreign artists. This is the catalogue of an exhibition, Dreaming of Dordrecht, which was about the many foreign painters that went to Dordrecht in the 19th century and that painted views of Dordrecht. Painters like Boudin, as the painting on the cover of this catalogue, but in the beginning of the 19th century also William Turner, and in the footsteps of Turner, many English painters followed, and they actually wanted to see the birthplace of Aelbert Cuyp. And also other exhibitions that we organized in the museum were very much about the Dutch painting and foreign painting. So we also with Hague School painting, we try to show the school of Barbizon and give some sort of broader context. So we thought that was a very interesting aspect to also include in the concept of the Cuyp exhibition, to tell the story about the appreciation of Cuyp, and also the story of how many English painters were influenced by the work of Cuyp, because there were so many works in England, and they were exhibited at the Royal Academy and the British Institution, like, for example, the famous painting which is now in Washington, this beautiful painting with a view of Dordrecht. It actually depicts the assembly of the fleet of Frederick Henry in 1646, and on the left we can see the city town gate and the great church of Dordrecht, and we can see all the ships laying at anchor in the harbor of Dordrecht, and of course the beautiful light, which at the time was in the 19th century England, they thought that it was a sunset, but it's actually a sunrise. It's early morning, and there's a beautiful light, especially when you look at the sails of the ships and also the clouds, of course. This golden haze in the background, which became very popular in England. But this painting was exhibited in 1815 at the British Institution. And of course, this painting was seen by many painters that visited that exhibition. And a year after the exhibition, the English painter Sir Augustus Walcott made this beautiful, almost like a homage to the painting by Aelbert Cuyp. This is the entrance to the Pool of London, which is now in Bowood House. And it also shows a large ship laying at anchor on the right. And it is, well, not Dordrecht, but it is almost the same composition as the painting by Cuyp. And there is, of course, this famous rivalry between Walcott and his friend Turner, and in a sense also with Cuyp. Let me see. When a year after that painting was made, Turner made this beautiful view of Dordrecht, and he actually, a year before that, visited Dordrecht to see the town of Aelbert Cuyp, and he depicts the ship here, which is the so-called beurtschip, the Swan, which was in the time of Cuyp still there, and still there in the time of Turner. And especially the light effect of the sun in the sky and the clouds is very much inspired by Cuyp, of course. And there were even other painters like John Crome, that was also very much inspired by that painting, that particular painting by Cuyp. But there were actually at the exhibition 5 paintings by Cuyp, 5 very influential paintings. And this is a painting from Kenwood House, which also shows, this is the Yarmouth Water Frolic. You can also see the same type of placement of all these sailing vessels, and also the curved shape of the clouds is very much inspired by Cuyp. So this became the concept of the exhibition, the collecting of Cuyp and the impact of Cuyp on British painters. And we very early on went to England, of course, and visited, for example, the Tate, and spoke with colleagues, and also the Victoria and Albert Museum, which was very, very helpful. And we looked at a lot of paintings and found several very interesting examples of painters that were clearly influenced by Aelbert Cuyp. But we also went, of course, to many collections, like, for example, Woburn Abbey. This is the estate of the Duke of Bedford, and there are 3 important paintings by Aelbert Cuyp. Here you can actually see on this wall this beautiful view of Nijmegen. You see, that is this painting, and we were very lucky that the Woburn Abbey actually at this moment is being renovated, And the 3 paintings by Aelbert Cuyp can be lent to Dordrecht next year, which is quite an exception because they have never been lent before to the Netherlands, and are, well, I don't think they have lent in the past, well, perhaps even 1 or 2 exhibitions, but they're rarely lent abroad, and they will all be at the exhibition, which we call In the Light of Cuyp in Dordrecht. And this is also one of the paintings from Woburn Abbey. This is Fishing Under the Ice near Dordrecht. In the background, in the left, you can see the tower of the great church of Dordrecht. And this is also one of the paintings that was at the early 1815 British Institution exhibition and must have been of great influence to many English painters. And especially in the background, you can see this clear, this bright light, a bit of a misty golden light. And this was very much, of course, a sort of inspiration for especially Turner. In the exhibition, we will show this painting from, I think, 1809 by Turner Abingdon of Dorchester Mead, it's called, and we can see how these cows are standing in the water. And Turner tries to also show this very same golden glow. He actually paints the sun itself in the painting, which is something Cuyp never did. He always places the sun outside of the picture frame. And in this very period, Turner was also, he became professor of perspective at the Royal Academy. And at one of his lectures, he spoke about Aelbert Cuyp and other Dutch painters. And about Cuyp, he said that Aelbert Cuyp, to a judgment so truly qualified, knew where to blend minutiae in all the golden color of ambient vapor. So he was very much focused on how the effect of sunlight is in the background and this hazy, misty vapor in the background. And let me see. Yeah, so we decided that Turner would be a very important figure in the exhibition. And apart from Turner, we would also like to focus on the earlier 18th century landscape painters from England, such as Gainsborough, and also Richard Wilson from Wales, who was actually one of the first to admire the work of Cuyp. This is a painting from Thomas Gainsborough from the National Gallery of Ireland in Dublin, and it is actually well, you could say not a copy, but a free transcription of a painting by Aelbert Cuyp, which is this painting in the Fitzwilliam Museum. It's very interesting to compare. The painting by Cuyp is an oval shape, but it is now an oval shape. In the 18th century, the corners were painted in, and this is how Gainsborough saw the painting and must have copied it well, in a free manner. But you can see how the composition of the cows is more or less the same, and how he changed certain aspects of it, but was very much also looking at how he painted clouds. And also, if you look at the foreground, this type of foliage is very clearly based on this part, and must have been something that he looked at very precisely. In the exhibition, we will show several other paintings by Gainsborough that are clearly based on Cuyp compositions, such as this painting from Houston, from the Sarah Campbell Blaffer Foundation collection. And it shows these cows standing on a sort of a rocky coast, looking out over the water, and these sailing vessels in the water. And there are actually several paintings by Cuyp and also by followers of Cuyp that show this very same composition. And actually Turner also later on painted this type of landscape with cows, very much inspired on the work of Cuyp. And the interesting thing is, of course, that during the exhibition and during the preparations of the exhibition, we came across several interesting works by Gainsborough. And actually, one of these works is this landscape with 2 cows and this was actually a painting that we were able to acquire last year, so that we can, tell the story of the influence of Cuyp in England, also in our permanent collection. So we're very happy that we could include this painting in the collection of the Dordrechts Museum and show it actually next to a painting by Cuyp that came from the same collection of the Duke of Bridgewater. And that is this painting of a piping shepherd. And it shows two cows also in the same colors as in the painting by Gainsborough. And it's very nice that these paintings were together in the collection of the Duke of Bridgewater for a long time and are now again reunited in the collection of the Dordrechts Museum and will be shown in the exhibition as well next year, together with other information about this collection, because we very much like to also show something of the context and have showcases with prints and books about this collection, etc. And apart from Turner and Gainsborough, we would also like to focus on Constable. And this is a bit more tricky because Constable was not in the way that Gainsborough and Turner were really inspired, and you can clearly see that in the work of these British artists. In the case of Constable, it is not that clear, but we know he must have seen, for example, this view of Dordrecht in a storm with a lightning effect by Aelbert Cuyp, which is now in Zurich. And when Constable saw this painting, he has said that he thought that it was truly sublime, and he wished he had seen it before he had sent his Salisbury away, referring to one of the paintings of Salisbury Cathedral. And this is the painting from the Guildhall Art Gallery that we're going to exhibit in the exhibition, which shows an equally stormy sky, you could say. And also, of course, a view of a town, a church in this case. So we will show this type of work by Constable and tell the story of how Constable was also influenced by Cuyp. And we know he must have looked at the skies of Cuyp. And for example, on the left, we can see a cloud study by Constable, and on the right, there is a painting, a sunset painting. It's called Sunset by Constable from the V&A. So this type of paintings we will show in the exhibition next year, to also give an idea of Constable taking it a step further. The whole concept of Aelbert Cuyp, who was known already in his time, or at least Houbraken writes about Aelbert Cuyp as being able to paint the different moments of the day, that you can clearly discern a sunset and a sunrise and the clear light of the day in his work. Something that was also said, of course, about Claude Lorrain and also about Jan Bot. But this phrase from Houbraken was taken over by English biographers, later English biographers. So Cuyp was very much known as a painter that was able to paint the different moments of the day. And Constable, of course, he really went outside and made all these sketches, studies of the skies, and even wrote at the back the different the hour of the day. This we think is interesting to show in the exhibition. And there are also many lesser known artists that are very interesting. For example, there is Thomas Sidney Cooper, a painter that was called the English Potter. And although he was called the English Potter, in many cases he is directly inspired by Aelbert Cuyp. For example, in this painting on the right by Thomas Sidney Cooper, we can see that he must have seen this painting on the left by Aelbert Cuyp, which is now in Washington. with this horseman in red, and also the grouping of the cows on a sort of a small hillock, and looking out over a landscape with rivers. And he also includes this type of clouds in a curved way, which is very much inspired by this the Mass at Dordrecht for Washington. So Thomas Sidney Cooper, although he must have looked at many other painters as well, and this is of course the case with most of the artists, the British artists that we will show in the exhibition, they didn't exclusively look at Cuyp, of course. They were also inspired by Jacob van Ruysdael and Paulus Potter and Adriaan van der Velde and many of the other painters that were collected in England. But in the case of Cuyp, especially when there is a clear light effect and several motifs taken from Cuyp, and in the case when painters that we know that they actually said something about Cuyp, well, we actually compiled a list of over 100 artists that were very much inspired by Cuyp in a lesser or other way. And the interesting thing is also that, for example, we came across an artist, an unknown artist called Thomas Baker of Leamington, he's called, and there's even a website devoted to him. And this is from a journal by this Thomas Baker, and he noted down all the paintings that he sold, and this is number 739, and he notes down that it is a group of cows, a Cuyp-like arrangement. And in the same notebook, and this was, let me see, in 1861, I think in the same year actually, he sold a painting, Cows with Sunset Effects, composition based on Cuyp. So this is a painter that made this type of landscapes, and if you look at these landscapes, well, you have the feeling that it is perhaps more in the manner of Potter or others, but this is actually the landscape. This landscape, the painting here, which is the one that he made a small sketch of. And it might have been based on this painting by Cuyp, which is now in Houston, which shows cows on different levels. And this type of hill is also very much the same. So we also include this painter, this Thomas Baker, as one of the Cuyp followers, you could say, or at least painters that were inspired by Cuyp in our list of painters in the exhibition. The only thing is, of course, that we focus very much on the important painters, and we only show a few examples of these lesser known painters. And in this case, this Thomas Baker didn't even make it into the selection of the exhibition. I think one of the more surprising artists in the exhibition is Augustus Walcott. On the left, we see a painting that is clearly inspired by the work of Cuyp. In many cases, the painting on the right was shown as the example. This is the painting from the Dulwich Picture Gallery, a very important painting for the Cuyp reputation, because many people wrote about it at the time, and even Ruskin had something to say about it. And it shows a beautiful light effect, and actually the figures, these figures who are one reclining and the other one talking, probably might be a little bit the same like these two figures in a painting by Walcott, but especially the way in which Cuyp paints this steep cliff. These rocks might be comparable, but there's even a better comparison, which is the painting in the National Gallery, which is the painting on the right here. And what we can see also the same type of mountains in the background, but especially interesting is this dog here, which is in almost the same position as or pose as this dog in the work of Cuyp. And Cuyp was actually called the modern Cuyp in his time. We decided to include 3 paintings by him in the exhibition because he's really an interesting figure. Let me see. And this is also one of the highlights in the exhibition, a painting that we will be able to show from the English Royal Collection. And it is a beautiful late example. And we would also like to give an idea of the collectors at the time. So we have in the exhibition a portrait of the Marquess of Bute, who bought the Bute Cuyp from the National Gallery that I showed earlier on. But also we're going to show a very small miniature portrait of George IV, the English king, who bought this painting. And for example, this is a portrait on the right of Nathaniel Ryder, the first Baron of Harrowby, who had this Sandon Hall, which you can see here built. And in 1760, he bought this painting by Aelbert Cuyp. This is the painting that we now already have on view and that was restored in the Dordrechts Museum. And this is one of the earliest examples of a painting that was that came into the possession of an English country house owner. And this Nathaniel Ryder, this Baron of Harrowby, he also had have a dairy farm and home farm made on his estate. So he was very much into the dairy farming and into cows. So also the subject of this painting was of interest to these English collectors. And in this way, Cuyp became almost like the ultimate country house artist in England. So that's what we try to do, is to show this painting together with the portrait of the first owner in England, and it is still within the Harrowby family. We try to show some context, and we also have this account book in which it is stated that this painting was bought in 1760 for £21. That is what eventually turned out to be the concept of the exhibition, the appreciation, the collecting of Cuyp, but also the impact on British painters. And I think I would like to conclude with that. Yes, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for this fascinating talk, and even more than before, I'm really looking forward to seeing this exhibition. It's absolutely most promising. It's actually good we have to wait for the fall, so we're certain we can go there without many limits. So that's rather something. For everyone here, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I already see the first questions being put in that chat, so please do. I have a first question for you, because one of the questions that turn up in my mind is why exactly England? Why not, for example, France or Italy? Certainly, since you refer so much to Claude Lorrain, so in that way, that the way of representing light or showing light is very similar to a French/Italian tradition. You also see a very big influence of potter, for example, in France. Certainly when the young bull, now at the Maurits house, is brought to the Louvre in the French Revolution. So why exactly England, and why not France, Italy, or another European country, you think?
Most of the paintings went to England, and the thing is with Cuyp that he was discovered relatively late. And for example, there was this famous collection of Johan van der Linden van Slingeland in Dordrecht, and he died in 1782 or 3. And this collection was sold in 1785. And up until that moment, most of the important paintings by Cuyp were still in Dordrecht. It was only that moment, and most of the buyers at the auction were English. So they all went to England, and well, he just became a favorite of the English, and there were some paintings that went to France, and of course you can still find 3 paintings by Cuyp in the Louvre, but they are not the best. All the important paintings went to England, so very early on it spurred some a Cuyp craze actually in England. And as I said, it much like Claude Lorrain, who was also in England incorporated more or less as an English painter, or as a painter that everybody, the British aristocracy in particular, wanted to have in their large country houses. Cuyp also, because he was able to to show the light of Claude, but transform it to a Dutch setting. And for example, Richard Wilson more or less did the same. He also was inspired by the light of Claude, but painted it in a English or Welsh setting. So yeah, I think, and apart from the fact that the cows especially were in some cases very much liked by the country estate owners who had also real cows on their estates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question by Lotje Dalmijn, and also a question of me actually. Do we have more explicit? Can you say something more explicitly about the primary sources of the painters? Are there sources who really tell in what ways they're copying, or in what ways they're inspired? And so it goes beyond our own visual analyses. And then an additional question in what did the theoreticians as Ruskin do with Cuyp?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in most cases, it's very general what we know about the actual influence. Or, for example, if you take Gainsborough, we know, of course, that he saw certain paintings, and he copied them, and that he had his own manner of painting and transformed it to that. And we only know that, for example, his daughter said about her father that he was passionately fond of the paintings of Cuyp and Berghem. So these are the only sources that we have, apart from the actual paintings that have survived. So of course we look at the aspects that were most commonly taken over, or most influential by Cuyp, and in most cases it concerns the light. And we know, I talked about the quote from Turner during his lecture about perspective and light. And in other cases, it clearly is motives like cows, and because Cuyp always has these very dignified cows, and also the way Cuyp paints foliage, and in most cases it is a combination of several of these motives to see what is actually most in most cases taken over by Cuyp. But there are no, apart from these notebooks I showed from this Thomas Baker of Leamington, who only says that he took over the composition of Cuyp. And of course there are an incredibly large number of copies after Cuyp, most of them nowadays anonymous. But there are no real sources that tell about what they actually saw. There are some ideas about Constable, for example, being influenced by, if you look at, is this painting still visible? This painting from the Royal Collection, the foreground, this type of foliage, which looks like it, with all the highlights, like it is like Cuyp used his brush to make all these highlights like glitter, which is, well, we know that Constable used a technique where he's actually almost like dripping his paint on the canvas. But this is not, this is only from later art historians who think that it is more or less the same. I don't agree with them at all. But yeah, it would be nice, of course, if we knew sources that tell really about how it was painted and what they were actually learning from Cuyp.
Mm-hmm. And theoreticians like Ruskin, do they do something with Cuyp?
Well, Ruskin is actually one of the critics that is who is very negative about Cuyp, especially about the cows of Cuyp. He says that he has never seen a cow painted in a good manner by Cuyp, and he is also there is this about one of the paintings in the Dutch picture gallery. There is an I think there's a quote that someone compares the sky to an unripe nectarine, and Ruskin ridicules this quote about Cuyp. So he isn't that fond of Cuyp, actually.
All right. Another question relates to the relationship with landscape painting and the land reclamation process that goes on in England in that moment. So, in how far? So, the depiction of landscape painting and the relation with reclamation process. And Catherine Powell asks, in how far can you apply that to the reception of Cuyp?
I think that is, in a sense, of importance, and the interesting thing is, of course, that the original owners of paintings by Cuyp in Dordrecht, they also, because Dordrecht still is an island, it is surrounded by rivers, and in the 17th century, much of the land around Dordrecht was reclaimed from the water, especially after the St. Elizabeth flood, which took place in 4021. And created more or less the Biesbos area around the city. And many of the wealthy owners of paintings by Cuyp, they also owned land outside of Dordrecht. And the dairy farming, cattle husbandry was a new thing in that time, and this is very much the same that could be applied to the English owners in the 18th and 19th centuries, because they indeed also had land and husbandry interest, and so yes, I think that is absolutely of importance.
Thank you. Another question is by Huiming Jia. So the first slide, maybe I go back to the first slide. That's this one. So there, the question turns up that in how far can you how to relate it to genre? In how far can this be called a landscape? Does it need to be called a portrait? And in how far this kind of, you already mentioned the cows, but maybe also the figures, the human figures represented, do they have an influence on England?
Yeah, well, this is very interesting. This is not a portrait, because, well, Cuyp did make equestrian portraits, like the portraits of the Michiel and Cornelis Pompen van Meerdervoort in the Metropolitan Museum of Art with their tutor. And those faces are really worked out minutely. And in this case, these are very general figures. And these were really made to for the owners, for the buyers to identify themselves with, without being real portraits. So it is a sort of a genre landscape combination. Yeah, it is very much about the land, the horses, the outside living, and of course the equestrian aspect of it was something that also very much appealed to the British taste, and still does. And we have also looked into the relationship between, for example, these horse paintings by Cuyp and the equestrian sporting paintings in England that also were started in the 18th century with Wooton and later with Stubbs. But there is no real connection or proof that these artists actually saw the paintings by Cuyp. Although in some cases there are, I think, some influences that you might say that Cuyp must have inspired them, but it's not as clear.
All right. Thank you. Another question is a very simple question. In how far can you involve experts on cloud formation? Because clouds are so important in both the British and in Cuyp's paintings.
Yeah. Of course, in the case of Constable, that is very interesting, and it's something that we don't really pay attention to in the exhibition or the catalogue. But we did use, of course, there's this catalogue about Constable skies, and the author also writes about Cuyp, indeed, and relates the skies of Cuyp to the ones painted by Constable. And there are, in fact, if you look at the 19th century reviews of exhibitions where paintings by Cuyp are shown, in some cases, they are talking about these, how do you call them, the circular clouds and things that, well, this new science that came up in the 19th century. They also looked at the paintings by Cuyp in this new scientific way. So it is interesting, but there's not much about it. It's of course it relates more to the paintings by Constable than the paintings by Cuyp.
Another question by Dana Dekkers is about the tension between, on one hand, emulation, copying, emulating Cuyp, and on the other hand, the rise, certainly in England in that period, on the ideals of the painter as an original, the originality of the painter, the creativity, the ingenuity of the painter. So in how far did that contrast? How did that work together? On the one hand, the reception of Cuyp, on the other hand, those new, let's say, romantic ideas about the ideal painter?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, of course, that we focus on these important painters like Turner, Gainsborough, and Constable, and they, of course, they had a style of their own, and the lesser known painters, they were the ones that were actually copying and staying close to the style of Cuyp and to the manner of Cuyp. And I think that especially Turner, who was a painter who was constantly rivaling with both contemporaries and old master painters, is very interesting. And the interesting thing is that early on in his career, he was very much inspired by the Cuyp light. But he went another way, of course. But if you look at the sketchbooks, and for example, he made sketches and says in many cases that where he notes down when he sees a certain landscape sketching outside, he notes down quite a Cuyp or Cuyp. And during his entire career, he actually had Cuyp in his mind, or the light of Cuyp, or when he saw certain sunlight effects, he was thinking about Cuyp. So this is the way in which it worked for Turner. He, of course, surpassed Cuyp in a sense, and became the painter of light and sunlight, and was judged by his contemporaries as the painter of light, of sunlight, in fact. Yeah, that was for Turner the case.
And the last question by Eden is about the previous plan of an exhibition on Cuyp was put away because it was too art historical. And
Yeah.
Eden would like to know what you mean with too art historical.
Well, that was the idea of these spheres of influences about including painters like Jan van Gooyen and Simon de Vlieger and Saftleven and others that must have been of influence to Cuyp. And then, of course, also Jan Bot and perhaps other Italianate painters. And that it turned out to be more like a book than an exhibition. An exhibition has, well, you have to also think about a broader audience. And these type of exhibitions only work if you have very good combinations of paintings and it is visually clear that one painter was inspired by the other. And we thought that when you're talking about famous artists like, apart from Cuyp, Gainsborough, Constable and Turner, this will appeal to a broader audience. And well, of course, you still have to make these very clear combinations, juxtapositions of paintings that really works. And in some cases, we will have the work of Cuyp next to the work of a so-called follower. But in other cases, we just tell the story of the collecting of Cuyp and also of the influence of Cuyp with the work of these later English painters. So yeah, I think that. So what I meant with an art historical and more art historical exhibition is that these combinations will probably not work as well in an exhibition, and perhaps are better explained when you have the time to explain that in a catalog or in a book, for example.
Yes, very good. Thank you very, very much for this very fascinating preview of the exhibition. Also, thank you for answering all the questions. Everyone, thank you for being here and for asking questions. Next week, we have a talk by Sarah Moran on a Jesuit chapel in Antwerp. Same time, same day, also Thursday. Hope to see you there. Sandra, thank you very much again, and hope to see you in Dordrecht. Bye-bye.
Of course.
Bye.
You're most welcome. Thank you.